And I will start off by saying good afternoon to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for another MassMEDIC program. I'm Rachel Robinson, Vice President at MassMEDIC, and we're absolutely thrilled to have you joining us for another virtual town hall. This has been a really fun 18 months with all of you doing these programs. Really do appreciate all the support. I know we're going to have a really interesting discussion today on FDA. Always a hot topic. But before we get started, I did want to just give a shout out to a few of our sponsors and say thank you to Greenlight Guru, our series sponsor, as well as Toxicon, NPR, the Mullings Group, Zymedica, Boston Analytical, Haffey & Co., R&Q Solutions, and QAD. We couldn't do any of these virtual programs without your support, so really do appreciate all of the input and feedback. And I have to say thank you ahead of time to our speakers. So we could not do these virtual programs, obviously, without the incredible support of our industry experts. And we've got two really fantastic ones on the line with us today. So I do want to give you a quick reminder that there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free during the program to pop your questions in. We will have time for Q&A with Mark and Etienne, both at different points in the program. So please feel free to pop your questions in. Otherwise, I'll be running all of the questions myself, which I don't have a problem with, but you'll probably want to get some of yours in as well. So I think that's a really great time for me to then introduce Mark Leahy from Mdma. Mark is a fantastic partner of MassMEDIC's. It is our eyes and ears in DC and everything that's going on there. So Mark, thank you so much for joining us today and giving us an update on where things are with MDUFA and anything else you can share with us.
Great. Thanks so much, Rachel. Appreciate the opportunity to be with everybody today. As we were discussing beforehand, hopefully we can do this in person in the not too distant future. But again, as Rachel said, great partnership with MassMEDIC and so many different issues. I thought I'd take 5-10 minutes to talk about the state of play and then happy to answer any questions that folks have. And just, by way of background, Mdma represents about 300 primarily small to mid-size medtech companies. We try to be their eyes and ears here in Washington. The group was interestingly founded back in 1992 by a handful of executives. It was around this user fee issue. FDA had gotten progressively more risk averse, longer review times, and there were a handful of larger companies who felt that it was about more resources, that if we give FDA more money, that would improve the process. A lot of our members were engineers, entrepreneurs, innovators, and they felt you don't put more money into a suboptimal system, you have to optimize it first and then make investments. And so while the pharmaceutical user fee started in 92, we had a 10-year pause. And again, I think a lot of the genesis was to make sure that we put reforms in place. Ultimately, that culminated in the 1997 Mdma legislation that really did streamline special 510K, made the process more predictable, transparent, consistent. So then when we got to 2002, then we started making investments. So again, I've had the great privilege of being at Mdma for nearly 20 years, representing the industry for each iteration of the user fee program. We're in year 5, we're in the 5th iteration that we're negotiating right now. And I think, there's great alignment amongst the industry. We have a great working relationship with our friends at AdvaMed, with MIDA, with ACLA, to make sure that the common interests of industry are being represented. We are in the midst of negotiations, so I can't get into all the particulars, but what I can share with you is some of the statements that have been made at public stakeholder meetings, the meeting minutes that have been published, and kind of just share, the vision that industry has as we look forward here. And I think it starts off with kind of the core principles that we have as industry. First and foremost is that timely patient access to safe and effective products. That's our kind of guiding light here. And I think that's something both FDA and industry feel is critically important. It's also critically important that Congress remain the primary source of industry funding. We have always in industry came to the table recognizing that user fees would be supplemental to appropriations to have enhanced performance and predictability. It was never intended to be the primary source of funding. So again, making sure that Congress doesn't shirk in their duty in appropriating dollars is another foundational principle that all the trades are aligned around. The third is that the user fee program be utilized for the pre-market review process. Again, this is kind of a user fee for submissions to provide greater predictability, transparency on the pre-market side. We're not averse to FDA engaging in post-market activities. And we've said if there are appropriate ones, we'll work with Congress and other stakeholders to get congressional appropriations to support those activities. But again, user fees are to focus on the pre-market side of the house. And then the fourth one is that, again, we've made significant investments from MDUFA 1 to MDUFA 5. The first year of the user-fee program in FY 2003, industry paid about $20 million in user fees. Last year was almost $300 million. So we've had significant increased investment. I think that shows our dedication and interest in the program. And again, the final element is we want to look at ways to enhance the program, but they should be of mutual interest to both FDA and industry. It shouldn't be industry saying, this is a negotiation, we want something that FDA doesn't have interest in, or vice versa, common areas of focus. So with that as kind of the overarching guiding principles that the organizations have all come to the table and put forth during the negotiation table, when we look at where are we going, what are priorities for MDUFA 5, you've all lived the uncertainty and really the extraordinary times of the last 18 months. And first and foremost, credit to Dr. Shuren and Tim Stenzel and all the leaders at FDA and all the reviewers and all the professional staff. They have done extraordinary work through an extraordinarily unique time period, working tremendous hours to make sure that not only those COVID-related products get to the market quickly, but also the non-COVID products do so as well. And so, again, credit to FDA for all the work they've done. Hopefully, they're on the EUAs and the diagnostic and some of the COVID areas. We're seeing, there was a backlog of thousands that's down to the hundreds. So hopefully they're working their way out of that backlog. And by the time we start with MDUFA 5, we'll have kind of worked through a lot of the COVID capacity. And so they can open up more to work in traditional submissions. But with that as the backdrop, we didn't think it's the right time to kind of dramatically reorient the program. And it was working very well prior to COVID. Hopefully COVID moves through, and then let's just build upon the successes that MDUFA 4 had in place. And so that's really our kind of tagline has been focus on fundamentals, back to the basics. We don't think, this is that we can get into this. We put over $1 billion on the table for MDUFA 4 to hit certain performance targets. Some of those have lagged it a little bit. And again, these are unique circumstances. So we're not laying blame saying FDA, you failed. These are extraordinary circumstances. But rather than putting more metrics or more goals on the table, let's make sure, first and foremost, under MDUFA 5, that we get the benefit of the bargain of MDUFA 4. You have to meet all the MDUFA 4 goals for the MDUFA 4 dollars. On top of that, there's a carryover balance of excess collections of about $250 million by the time September 30th. It's about 210 million right now available for use. I think it'll be about 250 million. And so I think for us too, it's how do you invest those resources into additional reviewers, medical experts, just build capacity to help with better interaction, and also again providing more ability to meet some of those MDUFA goals that haven't been met. And then, if there are additional areas of mutual interest that we can align around that would drive consistency, predictability, transparency, by all means, that we look forward to working with our FDA partners there. So that's kind of around the world in about 7 or 8 minutes on kind of the state of play. And just as far as timing, we hope to, we're kind of getting at crunch time now. I think we're gonna be picking up the pace and the frequency of our meetings. So hopefully we'll be able to close the gaps that exist. And again, I've done this as the 5th time, and every other time there've been bumps along the road, but we've ultimately reached agreement. And I see no reason why that won't happen this time.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, so reminder, questions, everybody use the Q&A, but I do have a couple to start. So where are we with current negotiations? Are there any kind of entrenched points that are impacting the path forward that you can share?
So again, some of this has been included in the meeting minutes, and Dr. Shuren has been pretty active in speaking on the podium as well. I think, there's certainly alignment of, patient safety is paramount and fundamental. We agree that we need, the additional capacity with reviewers, medical experts, chief medical officers. Those would all help, I think, with building up additional capacity. I think where we're, still trying to understand, I think there's again, both Dr. Shuren and Doug Kelly have been pretty proactive about this TAP proposal. Kind of this, it's kind of a TPLC. Initially, it had kind of a CMS private payer component. Maybe it doesn't now, maybe it's on breakthrough. So it's just kind of evolved a bit. And again, I think there's, it's an interesting concept, hasn't necessarily been demonstrated or proven out yet. And so is there a willingness to maybe, have a targeted pilot around that as a kind of a proof of concept? I think so. But again, I think the industry writ large is really interested in how do we take the available resources we have now from the care of a balance, potentially additional, and put those into bodies to add reviewers, to add the medical expertise to help, with all submissions. So I think that's just an area of that the meeting minutes has kind of highlighted, where FDA has said they are very interested in it, and initially industry has stated its opposition, but maybe there's some middle ground that could be had there.
And you mentioned, there's obviously been we call it a distraction the last 18 months away from some certain goals. Anything that you're really looking forward to kind of pushing in the next round? What's kind of top of mind in Mdma 5?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I think, as I, just to reiterate, I'm not aware of any necessarily new goals that we're looking to impose upon FDA. When we look at kind of the Mdma 4 goals, one of the key areas of focus, and again, we polled our members prior to Mdma 4, and 95% said the quality of the journey was more important than the speed of the journey. Not saying time is not important, but again, I think by definition, if you have a predictable quality process, and I'm sure Etienne can talk to this as well, you have more consistency you're going to get through, the output will be more efficient as well. And one of the key performance goals or metrics we had under the last commitment letter was that FDA would provide the justification and rationale and cite through statute, guidance, regulation, the justification for any deficiency. The point being, if a company is asked to, get to deficiency letter, it would be great to have an understanding and a rationale as to why the reviewer is asking for additional information. We think it's reasonable, and so that's and we talk about all deficiencies in the commitment letter. FDA audited themselves after the first year Mdma. They were only doing that in about 25% of the deficiency letters. To their credit, they put additional resources training around that. They were about 50% the last time this audit took place. And so now, again, I think that's an area where we'd love to get to a place where if FDA is, and again, they're right to send a deficiency to a company, but we think it's also more than reasonable for that company to understand the reasoning behind the reviewer asking for that information. So I think that's an area of focus. And there is some total time to review goals, particularly for 510Ks that, granted we're ambitious under Mdma 4 and are trending in the wrong direction. So, those are a couple that jump out. And again, for us, it's, we paid a significant amount in Mdma 4 to receive the benefit of the bargain. We understand circumstances beyond anyone's control arose. So let's just, double down and make sure that we execute on those before we entertain additional efforts.
It's fantastic. I think those are two really excellent points that you brought out, and two obviously very crucial to the medtech industry right now and to our members and your members as well. How do you interact? It would be great to know how you engage with your members to understand what is top of mind for them. You mentioned surveys. What other kind of information are you gathering from them?
Sure. Well, we have, I kind of joke, I view my job as the plumber. People only call when things get stuck. You don't usually have people knocking on your door, calling your email when things are going smoothly. So I understand there's kind of an adverse selection there. But, it starts truly with just being close to the membership and hearing from them directly of what they're experiencing. We do survey our members frequently. In fact, back 10 years ago, we worked with Josh Mackow out of Stanford, partnered with NVCA and MassMEDIC and other state groups to really quantify the state of play at FDA and some of the choke points. And that was a seminal, I think, industry survey that laid the groundwork for the reforms in Fidesia. And today, similar, we have surveys, we have a working group. And again, I will tell you that for the overwhelming, particularly up until about October, I mean, it was, people were extraordinarily pleased with the performance that FDA was doing, in both in the COVID space and the non-COVID space. I think OHT7 got a little bit overwhelmed as we went in the fall and all these EUAs coming in. And so I think the diagnostics folks particularly have been faced with a challenge because, unless you meet 4 criteria, pre-subs aren't being granted. There are actually PMA supplements and 510Ks that were being filed. The user fee was being paid, but a reviewer wasn't being basically assigned. FDA is moving away from that, but they're still telling those companies that despite what the MDUFA goals say, your timeline is going to be about a 210 days. So, those are still things they're working through. But I will say on the other 90%, because what we've heard from former FDA folks and others, only about 10% of the FDA workforce has kind of been impacted by COVID. The other 90% have kind of stayed in their lanes in cardiovascular orthopedic. And again, maybe it's anecdotal, but what we've heard from our members is just the responsiveness and the feedback has been extraordinary. And we've heard from some reviewers, both present and former, working at home, like we've all experienced as well, companies were getting emails, on a weekend at 11 at night. So it seems like the process became more collaborative and interactive, and that feedback loop. And maybe it's because, you don't have all hands meeting or some of the administrative things so they were just focused on the meat and potatoes of reviewing. But again, the experience that our members had for the overwhelming majority, both COVID and non-COVID, has been extremely grateful and appreciative of the responsiveness and the engagement with the agency.
That's great to hear. I completely, can resonate with that, what we're hearing from some of our members as well. So can you give us a little historical context? You've worked on a number of these negotiations. What makes this negotiation different than past negotiations?
Well, I think you have, first and foremost, in this, just a negotiation itself, to have it be virtual, to not be in the room with people, building kind of the personal relationships, the sidebars, that there's no doubt that has been a factor. Another factor is we were supposed to start in the spring of 19 with the, I'm sorry, losing my dates here. I think it was the spring of 19. Whenever COVID, I guess I'm going backtracking now. We're at March of 19, right? That was when all this. So you had this in 20, excuse me.
2020.
So spring of 2020, we're supposed to have a public stakeholder meeting. That got delayed 6 months because of COVID. You also have, a lot of our companies, both members and on the negotiating team, are making diagnostics. They're making key products, and so in FDA. So I think you have virtual negotiations, you had bandwidth from both FDA and industry that kind of created some dynamics. And now, again, I think, just the philosophies of what is needed for MDUFA 5 is it kind of focus on fundamentals and let's, have as little disruption as possible. I think that's the industry approach. I think FDA is trying to be more maybe transformative. And so again, I think those are some of the unique characteristics that exist now. But as I said earlier, again, this is not uncommon to have some bumps along the road. For MDUFA 4, we reached agreement in summer of 16. And so that was kind of an early agreement. For MDUFA 3. The negotiation and agreement wasn't, we didn't reach agreement until March of the year authorized. So, you can see there's, no negotiation is the same. And so there'll be some bumps along the road, but again, I remain confident. There hasn't been a time where at the end of the day, industry and FDA hasn't aligned around an agreement, and I'm confident we'll be able to do so now.
Well, good, because my question was, what happens if it doesn't work? But you're
it will. It will. And again, at the end of the day, I mean, I'm confident it will. If you do have a situation though that in which you can't, because obviously it's the 4 trade associations and FDA reaching agreement. That agreement is then public meeting, put in the FR public meeting, and then transmitted to Congress. Ultimately, it's up to Congress though to put that agreement into legislative text, and they have the ability to tweak, hopefully with FDA and industry support as well. And again, in the unfortunate event that we didn't have all 4 trades supporting with FDA, then you wouldn't have that agreement communicated to the Hill and there. So who knows what would happen. I'm not a member of Congress, obviously, nor a staffer, but it's not uncommon that in the absence of an agreement, kind of the lowest common denominator is the default. And again, I don't think that would be good for FDA or industry.
How does the change in administration affect all of this? I would imagine it makes things a bit more complicated, or does it not?
I think we have had the good fortune every time of keeping this kind of out of the political football back and forth. There are challenging negotiations, but at the end of the day, I think the last user fee program was reauthorized with 400 plus members of the House and 93 or 97 members of the Senate. So, we've been very fortunate. I think that, the device tax is a great example on reimbursement, FDA, to build bipartisan support. And so, can sometimes the commissioner or the administration lean things in one direction? It can. But I think in this instance, and obviously with Dr. Woodcock there being in there in an acting capacity, that could have a role, and maybe as we close here or things get reviewed. But again, I think the approach we've always taken is, focusing in on what's best for the patient, reasonable reforms, and fortunately, it hasn't kind of jerked too far in one direction or the other based upon, the political landscape.
Any thoughts on the kind of hiring crunch that's happening right now? Obviously, industry has lost a lot of talents leaving, talents moving. Any thoughts on how the FDA kind of reacts to that or is hit by that when it comes to hiring new reviewers?
Sure. Well, it's a great question. And MDma 4, we're funding about 230 or 40, I think, FTEs over the course of the 5-year window. Even prior to COVID, they were behind significantly and hit those hiring targets. And so we had kind of been strongly encouraging them to keep up because, part of this issue with the backlog in OHT 7, they have to reassign 50 people and that kind of, and they had more than 50 people that we were funding that those seats were vacant. So, but to their credit, based upon the data I've seen, that FDA has increased their hiring and trying to get back on track for MDma 4. We're still waiting to we're also funding a lot of FTEs for MDma 1 through 3, and there hasn't been clarity on how many of those seats that we're funding are vacant, but we hope to receive that. And I think the key here, just like all the organizations likely on the phone, is going to be flexibility here, because I think from my perspective, what we're hearing from reviewers and folks close to FDA, there are a lot of people who have actually reached, full benefits of retirement and their tenure there, but are staying on because of the public health emergency. They love their job. And candidly, I think maybe there's a little bit more flexibility to do that remotely. And, hopefully that will continue once we're through COVID, because, in addition to any new people we may fund through MDma 5, my big concern is that there's probably this large bolus of, again, people who have reached the full benefit threshold, that have great institutional knowledge, and hopefully there's the flexibility in the workforce that allows those folks to stay on and continue to work as that bench gets built up behind them. So again, I think these are certainly issues we are watching closely, but hopefully some of the flexibilities that are in place for FDA will allow them to continue to attract great talent to build for the future.
I think that's a great point. And I think that's what we're also hearing from so many of our member companies is around that flexibility, right? If the industry is able to be flexible and kind of roll with the times and understand that things are not going to go back to exactly the way they were before. And the best middle ground is probably going to be how you keep the industry driving at a rapid pace. And obviously reviewers play a huge part in that.
Right. And interesting, along those lines, pre-subs have been an area of interest for both FDA and industry. The formal pre-submission process started a couple of UFAs ago, and it's really an opportunity to come and meet with FDA to work through some clinical trial design issues or other technical questions, get some feedback before that submission takes place. And we have goals around a certain number of pre-subs being scheduled in a certain time period. But what's been interesting through COVID is that a lot of these pre-subs have been happening virtually. And I think both FDA and industry have appreciated that there are times in which you want to be across the table face-to-face with someone. Maybe that first pre-sub for a new product, and you want to get to know the team and they want to get to know you. And so, that face-to-face is important. But once that kind of, relationship is established, does the virtual format, is that conducive to helping a more, still a meaningful dialogue back and forth, but in a more efficient way. And interestingly, the senior person at FDA shared with me during COVID that one of the rate limiting factors, the most significant rate limiting factors of being able to do more pre-subs and the time that industry would like was just physical space at White Oak, that to find rooms to have all the industry folks and all the review teams who need to be in the rooms, that could, people who were ready 3 weeks before, but there wasn't a physical place where they can meet. And so, something we should collectively be thinking about, are there ways to kind of triage pre-subs that certain ones can be dealt with in writing, others, virtually, and then others in person, and that may allow for, greater efficiency and throughput in the system as well.
Absolutely, that's a great point. I know we only have you for a couple more minutes, but you mentioned the breakthrough device program earlier. I'm just wondering if you've heard anything positive or negative from your members as to them taking advantage of that, how people are kind of viewing that internally.
I think those who have received a breakthrough designation, the regulatory sprints that take place, the interaction that you have with FDA, I think is certainly beneficial. Interestingly, I think they're, and what was eye-opening to us in some of these discussions is how long after that breakthrough designation, I think it's 3.5, 4 years, only 19% have actually resulted in a marketing submission. And so, there's a lot of effort and time there. We certainly appreciate FDA's effort in that regard, working with innovators. And I think the other big piece, not just on the FDA side, but I'm sure your members, I know we've been working on this collaboratively, is trying to make sure that CMS moves forward with some sort of, if it's MCIT, 1.0, 2.0, but a program that would allow accelerated coverage, coding and payment for these novel technologies after regulatory approval or market authorization, so that, we kind of narrow that gap. And again, I think that's why, what FDA is doing in conjunction with working with our friends at CMS, both of those need to be optimized to make sure that true patient access is realized.
Yeah, I think you're spot on that. I think what we're hearing from a lot of companies is, from a marketing perspective, if you can get it, there's no reason not to go through the process to do it. Most of them already have the paperwork. It's not that, onerous a task if you have the data. But the second piece is obviously the most important from really capitalizing on it is how they're interacting with CMS. So I think that's a very good point. Any last parting words that you'd like to leave us with?
No, I just say, again, I appreciate the time, and I just encourage there's a lot going on with Mdma MCIT, and, being engaged with MassMEDIC, Mdma, Advocate, just making sure your voice is heard in the dialogue is critically important. And just appreciate the time. And if anyone has additional questions, Rachel, feel free to put us in touch, and happy to do a deeper dive with anybody.
I will absolutely do that. Mark, thank you so much for coming and sharing with us. I think some key takeaways are obviously negotiations are happening. They will move forward. We'll push on that. And, it seems like the priorities for FDA, should be in line with what our priorities are, right? Patient safety, obviously, updates and reviewer hires and ads, and really understanding how to spend that kind of surplus, what's going to go back into industry and be the most beneficial. So thank you so much for sharing that.
My pleasure.
All right, have a great day. So we're going to switch gears for the second half of the program. A number of our members recently have actually reached out with questions around guidance and regulation on combination products. Obviously, there's been some updates with FDA, but really it's just been around just highlighting questions around regulatory strategy for combo products. So I asked our friends at Greenlight Guru and Etienne to come and give us a little bit of an overview of what they're doing with their software, but obviously what it looks like from a regulatory strategy for combo products. So Etienne, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Rachel. I appreciate it. It's good to be with you all as well. And I just wanted to say, I don't know about the listeners, but I'm really thankful to have heard Mark. That was encouraging to hear him representing a voice in the needs of the industry to the FDA. That's really great. So I appreciate it. Wish I'd said it when he was still here. But anyway, yeah. Hey, everyone. My name is Etienne Nichols. I'll go ahead and share my screen so you just can see what I'm looking at as well. My name is Etienne Nichols. I'm a mechanical engineer and a medical device guru here at Greenlight Guru. For those of you who don't know what Greenlight Guru is, it is an all-in-one medical device QMS solution that is Part 11 compliant. We're also aligned to Part 820 and ISO 13485. It's definitely recommend you checking that out. But as Rachel said, today we're going to be talking about combination products. So for the, there are three main things I'd like to share today. So first, a brief history of combination products, and then try to answer the question, what is a combination product and the various permutations, and then covering a little bit of the CGMP for combination products, pharma versus med device. So for a lot of people, when you ask the question, combination products, why combination products? Combination products seem to be shrouded in mystery. It's a device, it's a drug. No, it's Superman. I mean, and they can be more challenging than a standalone device or a standalone drug because there are additional requirements. So one of the first things that I'd like to cover is just a brief history. One of the first combination products that was approved by the FDA was a transdermal drug delivery device to deliver scopolamine, which was it was formerly used to prevent nausea. There's since been a documentary about it being maybe one of the scariest drugs in the world. Not important, but you were probably familiar with this type of combination product today when you think about like nicotine patches. So that is a combination product. From the 1970s to 1990, combo products were handled pretty much ad hoc by the FDA. In 1990, the Safe Medical Devices Act included a provision for the regulation of combination products. Moving to 1997, the regulation of combination products fell under the FDA Modernization Act. And then in 2002, the Office of Combination Products was established, which I'm sure we're all thankful for at this point. And in 2004, draft CGMP was provided by the FDA, which has since been released. Unrelated, NASA Spirit spacecraft also landed on the surface of Mars in 2004. And then in 2013, 21 CFR Part 4, the CGMP requirements for combination products was released. So that's just a brief history and overview of where we've come, in the past 50 years or so. But what is a combination product? So a combination product is composed of any combination of a drug, device, or a biologic. The individual components are typically referred to as constituents. So for example, for an EpiPen, the auto-injector is the device constituent for that combination product, and then the epinephrine is the drug constituent. A lot of times we forget about the biologic and the drug being a combination product, but as well as a combination product for the FDA. In addition to the classifications, there are different types of combination products, and these are based on how they'll be experienced by the user. So for co-packaged, just like it sounds, the components are packaged together in the same box. An example of a co-packaged combination product would be a drug or vaccine vial packaged together with a drug delivery device. So these co-packed devices, it's typically assumed that these are done or manufactured at the same site. And so that does impact the regulations surrounding the co-packed, which we'll get to in just a little bit here. Second, there's the cross-labeled. These are where the components are provided separately, but they're specifically labeled for use with each other. An example of a cross-labeled combination product might be a photosensitizing drug with an activating laser or light source. And then third, we have a single entity, which this is where the components are physically, chemically, or otherwise combined. An example of a single entity combination product might be a drug-eluting stent, which is a stent that is coated with a slow-release medication to help prevent blood clots from forming in the stent. Another example might be a pre-filled drug delivery system, such as a metered dose inhaler. Each of these combination products have what's called the primary mode of action, or the PMOA, and that is the means by which the product achieves the most important effect. That's why it's called the primary mode for this therapeutic. Where the PMO comes from, whether it's from the drug or from the biologic or the device, that's really what determines the lead center for submission within the FDA and who you're going to be working with as you go through that submission. For example, if the PMOA comes from the drug, the CDER, the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, will be the lead center for submission. If the PMOA comes from the device, the CDRH is the lead center within FDA, and so on. There may be multiple modes of action in a combination product, and oftentimes there are multiple modes. In cases where the PMOA or the primary mode of action is not clear, the Office of Combination Products, or the OCP, is responsible for the agency assignment in the product classification. Okay, so that's all well and good. How much do I have to actually know about pharmaceuticals or devices? If I'm a pharmaceutical and I'm going to be having a device constituent, how much do I have to know about these CGMP regulations to have a combination device? And that's a good question. It's one we it's one we struggle with quite a bit. So to answer with that question, bear with me as we go through a few permutations. So the first one I'll cover or look at is the cross-labeled. So for cross-labeled combination products, since they will be provided separately, in this scenario, we're assuming that they are manufactured separately. 21 CFR Part 4, which is the CGMP for combination products, is going to be required. Full alignment with that. 21 CFR Part 820 for medical devices, 210 and 211 for drug constituents, and for biological product constituents, 600 through 680, as well as 1271, which covers HCT. Using this illustration, really everything but the kitchen sink, basically, if you're a cross-labeled product. It gets a little bit more interesting when you start getting into co-packed or single entity. If I use a device-led example, and this assumes separate or same facilities that this is manufactured within, it's still a combination product. So Part 4 does apply. And since it's device-led, Part 820 also applies. If there is a biologic component, Part 600 through 680 and 1271, as I mentioned, also apply for any of these examples if the biological product constituent is present. Those sections of the 21 CFR do apply. For the drug constituent, however, that's where it gets a little more interesting. Subpart 4.4 allows some streamlining of Part 210 and 211. So the areas listed, when we look at this testing and approval, rejection of components, calculation of yield, tamper evident packaging, and so forth, stability testing, reverse samples, it's important to note these are also required. Now, this is device-led, so typically, historically, you'll see that the drug leads a combination product, but there are a lot of combination products where the device is leading or a device is the sponsor. So in those areas, these are things that they will still have to be considering and still have to be meeting. But these are also things that the medical device companies are likely to struggle in since these are drug-specific parts of 21 CFR. So it's important to just kind of come to an agreement with both sides to make sure how we're aligning to meet these sections of the FDA. Similarly, if we have a co-packaged or single entity drug-led combination product, again, still a combination product, so Part 4 applies. Since it's drug-led, Part 210 and 211 also apply. And as I said, if there's a biological product constituent, Part 600, 680 through and 1271 will also apply. For the device constituent, however, subpart 4.4 again streamlines these requirements. These are likely the areas that the drug companies will struggle, again, kind of pointing to the weaknesses of the drug-led, perhaps. These are likely the areas they'll need to focus on to make sure they really get up to speed. This management responsibility, design controls, purchasing controls, CAPA, installation, servicing, things that are mentioned a little bit more vague, will have to be a little bit more specific as they go through this combination product. So the streamlining assumes, again, this assumes the same, these are manufactured in the same facility. If at any point they move to be separate facilities, whichever drug or whichever constituent of the combination product moves to that different facility, now it is subject to the full Part 820 if it's a device, or 210 and 211 if it is a drug. I hope you were able to stay awake through that. Because if you are, the last thing I want to mention is after 50 years in the making, combination product space is really coming to life. There's a lot going on with combination products. According to iHealthcare analysts, the global market for drug device combination products is anticipated to be 186.7 billion by 2027, expanding at a 6.4 compound annual growth rate from 2021 to 2027. So for the companies willing to navigate the complexity of bringing a combination product to market in a safe and effective way, it is worth it. So these are life-saving devices oftentimes. And so these are exciting times to be working in combination products. So I appreciate your attention as I went through all that. A few additional resources, just I don't know if we provide slides or not, but just if anyone wanted to look at those. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. We can share those afterwards with the video. And just for everybody, we did record this, so we'll make sure you get a copy. I think, Etienne, from a question perspective, what we often hear from people is they want to go drug or device first and figure
Yeah.
one out and then try to add the other. Is that just a completely double the work effort, or is it what's your kind of recommendation on that route?
Well, so I always go as Stephen Covey's begin with the end in mind. So whatever you're doing, it makes a lot more sense if you think, what's my pathway to market? And you may think it's too early to start thinking about cross-label or co-pack, but it's really never too early to start thinking about that, because that's going to determine what some of these regulations you're going to be complying with. So if you go with co-pack, your separate facilities, then you are going to be having to comply with both of those standards. But yeah, to your point, if they could potentially interact with each other. So that's going to, if the drug is going to interact with how the device works, it may impact how Part 820.30, the design controls, is approached. It may impact risk management. So I strongly recommend looking at those kind of in parallel as they go through. Yeah.
And then do you think there are, if you had to narrow down one or two most common either mistakes that people make or questions that you get asked? I mean, I know you just went through a lot of information, and obviously I stayed awake, but I know it's a lot.
Yeah.
Are there any kind of high level gotchas?
Yeah. So I have seen a few different companies where they thought that they were a device. So it might have been a biologic and drug. And so they're moving down, thinking that they're a medical device, moving down the path of medical device, starting to get their quality, their QSR up to speed when maybe they didn't have that previously. And then they find out from the Office of Combination Products that they're actually not a device. They are a combination product that's drug biologic, and they need to go through and submit through a different agency. So those are some of the things that are important to be considering and having those conversations with the Office of Combination Products early. There is a way to do kind of a pre-request for a designation. So those are things that you can email the Office of Combination Products and get a little bit of that early on. That doesn't stop them from changing the rules later on if that happens, but it keeps you in the clear anyway. So those are some of the things. That's from a regulatory standpoint. If I could answer the other side of that, and just working, so I worked as a project manager for a drug delivery device for a while, multiple pharmaceutical companies, things like that. The interesting thing is that we're coming to this same problem from different perspectives. So whether you're a device, so I'm a device guy. If I'm coming at this from Part 820, I have these different deliverables I want to meet. And I'm meeting with a project manager from a drug company, we're looking at this from two different perspectives. It's really important to put the glasses on from their side. So what is it that where are the gaps that I may be, they may perceive that I have, but really I'm meeting what I consider to be my standard, when really it needs to be a joint effort. So that is one of the pitfalls I've seen in the actual boots on the ground perspective.
No, that's a really great perspective, because I was almost tempted to jump into the design and product development questions, and I was like, oh, let's not dive too deep into that, because that's a whole other conversation about designing for a combo product as opposed to a device or a drug. But I think that's a really great overview, and I really do appreciate the perspective. And it doesn't look like we have any questions coming in from the audience, so I will say thank you for sharing that with us. And for the audience, we are going to end a few minutes early. I do want to give you a quick update on a few upcoming virtual programs that MassMEDIC has in the next 2 weeks. We are doing a program with Greenlight Guru on the 14th about risk management, so please feel free to check that out on our website. We're also doing a MedTech M&A conversation with MedWorld Advisors. We're going to have some private equity folks come and talk about what it's like to make an investment from a private equity standpoint. And then we do have our big Biomed Device Conference, which is an in-person conference that's coming up in just 2 weeks. I think we're actually just 10 or 11 days out from that. We start on the 21st, and we will be hosting our Startup Stadium at the live Biomed Conference downtown in Boston, where Our Ignite cohort will be pitching live, and we will have a number of other programs on the state of medtech investment, as well as partnering with strategic investors. So we'll have a number of really interesting industry speakers. So I hope you will join us for that. It is a free 2-day program, and we'd love to see you at the Startup Stadium. So if you have questions, shoot me a note at rachel@massmedic.com. I can get you all the info on that. Otherwise, it is on our website under the events section. And with that, I will say thank you for joining us for another town hall, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, Rachel. We'll see you later.